move to the panel. Hannes, please have a seat. And meanwhile, he will connect somebody from abroad, and I'll introduce another panelist, Paul-Olivier Dehaye, CEO of Hestia.ai. I won't tell you what it is. He will tell you himself in a second. He's a mathematician by training, and he was actually, as you see, they're handshaking, at the origin of uncovering the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and together with many journalists, including Hannes, so they know each other. And so welcome, Paul-Olivier. And we started the day with somebody from the Americas in the morning, Julia Angwin, 5 a.m. in New York. And we should end the day with somebody else who is in South America right now and should be, voila, I think I see her, Jessica Bidou. Can you hear us? Can you see us? I think we're getting there. So Jessica is a sociologist by training and a postdoc researcher at Sciences Po in Paris and the director of a non-profit association called personaldata.io, which again, I won't tell you what it does. She will tell you in a second. Welcome, Jessica. Can you hear us? Can you see us?
I hear you. I don't see you.
Where are you, in Venezuela or Colombia? I don't remember.
I'm in Venezuela.
Okay, perfect. So South America. Okay. Okay, so we start the panel. And as I said just before, actually, I didn't say what Personal Data IO is. Maybe you can tell it in your own words. And afterwards, you will tell what Hestia is. Please, Jessica.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks, Hannes, for this presentation. So Personal Data IO is a Swiss non-profit. We work internationally as well, and we are focused on developing data governance models with civil society. So we upskill society when they are organized. We help them organize themselves around data that they have recovered, and we help them deciding what to do with their data, how to produce value from their data. And also we help them to formulate the social problems that affect them when their data is used by other service providers.
Thanks a lot. Paul?
So Hestia.ai.
Yeah,
so I actually founded Personal Data IO that you just heard about, following work with Hannes. And at some point, I was like, okay, this is starting to move, and I wanted to work on the technological angles of what Jessica just described. So building some infrastructure that would facilitate the decision-making around how personal data should be used. Yes.
Thank you. So it seems like you all know each other since a while. I'm a bit the new guy in the club. No, you don't. Okay. But this is...
Jessica and Hannes don't know each other.
Okay, Jessica meet Hannes, Hannes meet Jessica. Now it is official. So can you tell us a more concrete example? Because it's always easier to imagine what you do concretely, project.
Yeah, so right now we're working on building... So we are working with Jessica on building 5 collectives around personal data. And I think one of them illustrates particularly well some of the topics that Hannes was talking about. So we do have one collective on news media, disinformation, all of those things. It's called The Eyeballs, but that's not necessarily the one I would like to talk about. Another one that we're trying to build is around work and mobility, somewhere at the intersection. And those Uber drivers that are trying to make sense of flows of information around them that affect their work. So there is the same element as with Hannes of making sense of flows of information. The angle that might be interesting in relation to what Hannes was saying was that through talking to lots of drivers, I've realized that there's actually a different subcommunity of drivers that has a very different social organization. And the crucial criterion is whether they use a regular engine car, like a thermic engine, or an electric engine. And that makes a huge difference for their social dynamics. The reason is that they drive all day, and if you drive an electric car in your day of 8 hours or so, you have to stop for an hour to charge your car. So suddenly you start anchoring a part of your day around an electric charger, and there starts to be a community that talks about the algorithm, but anchored in physical space. So these social relationships, monsieur here was talking about this, how do you decentralize? Well, Hannes was responding by saying, Switzerland is small, I know everyone, I've met in person everyone. He could have said, I've had a beer with my trolls, probably you have sometimes, like you have met them. So this physical angle combined with the abstractness of the digital space is quite important. And that's what I think is really important with this example of Uber drivers. Because of their car, because of the need to charge, because of the need to spend time around physical places, they start to talk to each other and they talk about the digital. So one response to what Hannes was saying is that these communities might be more powerful if you look at ways they are anchored in the physical space. It's not just abstract communities, communities that might be constructed through the algorithms, but they are really anchored locally, and that's really important.
Thank you. So this was an example of Hestia, right? Yeah. Jessica, can you give us an example of personal data, non-profit?
Yes, sure. So, of course, because we're working together, I would develop further what Paul-Olivier said. What we have realized is that the digital separates communities. They put them at distance. They also create a cleavage between experts and non-experts. And we saw that we have complementary skills. We have technological skills, we have sociological skills. And so, but the communities we are working with, they also have their skills. So what we do is that we work with them, so they teach us what are their social concerns when they are talking around an electric car charging terminal. So we build infrastructures that help them, but we also build decision models. So they define actually what concerns them about data. And with us, they gain skills, our skills, we gain them skills. And for instance, the Mobility Data Collective, what we are doing is that they have recovered already their data. We around 30 drivers, they are recovering their data. They go to even court for defending their working conditions rights, but then they don't know what to do else with their data. So we help them to protect it, to create security transactions between themselves, and also to produce a shared value from this data. And this is something that tackles what Hannes discussed about creating value and creating a shared reality. Well, we actually make sense of data and the social value of this data collective with them. And this is also in line with extreme citizen science. We also learn from them. We work together. That's what we do.
Thank you.
And maybe to help the audience and to help everyone, because Jessica and myself, we work together a lot. Over time, we have come to see really patterns in those community dynamics around data, around decision making, around algorithms. So, and we find that this example of the city and flows of information in the city are helpful to also understand flows of information in information space among people who consume content. So those are examples that help bridge lots of the abstractness of the topics that Hannes was talking about. A recommender system, how should it work? Well, an Uber driver can tell you what the cost is for them to pick up a passenger in a certain place. So this is very tangible in a sense for the audience, but also beyond the audience of experts.
Thank you. One thing isn't completely clear to me yet. So if I was an Uber driver now, I have the choice between a non-for-profit and a for-profit company. It's probably not this, right? What would make me come to which place?
Right. So very good question. Hestia wants to be a service provider to projects like Hannes's, like Jessica's, or like those collectives. We don't want to do the governance. We don't want to do the control over the data, because the idea is that this control would be decentralized in a certain way as much as possible. But there is still a need for infrastructure. So what Hestia wants is this to become a real service that people pay for, like you would contract with a service provider to do different types of services.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot. Clear to everybody? Then we move on. Else you ask. You always can interrupt, as we said in the morning. Okay, so I'll just maybe go on with what you said before. Oops, you said that it's about also meeting in a physical space, right? The Uber drivers. But Hannes, maybe back to you, or you can pass him the mic. So news, a shared community, a shared reality, but they're not necessarily in a physical space, right? So how do you place this connection from the physical space in your space, right? Which is then not linked to this.
I can say that during the development phase right now, we're actually hosting workshops and will be visiting people locally, because we understand that there's very different on the ground realities for news production and media production. So I'm working in one of Switzerland's biggest media companies, or probably Switzerland's biggest. And so my reality is very different from somebody who's working out of Graubünden or Ticino. And so we are trying to study this right now. So the same as the answer to Linus, we are trying to currently assess the scape, but knowing that there's a physical digital interaction, not yet the solution beginning of the project.
Thank you. Maybe I'll try to also rephrase, because I think what I still don't see exactly is, in your case, personal data is a means to understand how to serve good information, right? Mm-hmm. So, but the center is the news. While in your both projects, at the center is the person and his data and how to empower it and how to use it. Do I understand this correctly?
And so in our case, there are two groups. There's people who want to get the news they're interested in, right? And then there's people who are supplying and producing news, and they want to understand what the people are interested in. So there's a big industry of analytics that has evolved, and they are basically offering. They're making a centralized offer. Probably just a bit like Hestia, but they have a different name, and you might know them probably. And they're helping news organizations to understand their customers, right? But because all of this is playing out in a private sector, their recommendations might also, so it's hard to not think there might be other interests probably involved, depending on the company structure.
But okay, but that's what I was aiming. So at the end, here it's about getting your personal data understanding, and at the end, how do you avoid on the long term, because you still want to know the behavior of your customers, right. And how do you avoid to make the same pitfalls? At the end, we will need again Paul or Jessica to know how do you use my data to recommend me good news.
I'd be interested in how you would, if we get that user data, right, about the consumption patterns, right, and production supply side patterns, how do you deliver the information to producers, right, and how do you feed the recommender in a transparent way according to the rules set by the community? That's a big one, and you're
So I'll return the question. I don't have the answer because the community should decide. So before the community can decide, the community should be informed. So the question to you is, how do you document the business models that are currently behind the news ecosystem, knowing that what you just said, this news ecosystem is consistently based on tracking people, collecting their data, so there is conflicts of interests potentially there.
But in a very interesting way. So I'm never getting any intelligence about what I should write, because there's what they call, the golden wall between me and my publishers. And so I don't get any briefing what they're learning about news consumption, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's very indirect. And it's meaningful that this is indirect, because that leaves me a lot of, editorial reporting freedom, and that's good for the press and essential.
Jessica, can you hear me? The boys
yes.
are starting to ask questions and take on my role. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I would answer that actually we're changing a mindset in society. We want personal data. I mean, we don't want to conduct research on consumers. And we believe there is a dependence relationship between publishers and consumers, and that you need to create a shared value between each other, but you have to bring them to the table. And so because you are building a trust relationship, as you said, but you need to also upskill people already how to be critical. And this is a main problem we have today, society being non-critical because of the spread of fake news and everything that is published. And we also see journalists that are being using personal data from data brokers to produce news articles. So I think we need to first change this mindset of how you create your business models, not only with the publishers, but directly with the consumers.
Thank you. So there's really a red line going through the whole day here, which is the educational part. And that people need to, please?
The educational part, which scares everyone. It's like it scares everyone consistently because people think, oh, that's to create change in 10 years, 20 years. But I don't think that's true. I think that like part of what we're doing is also to accelerate this learning and to potentially change investment strategies of big corporate actors to try to shift the market faster, basically.
I'm a full believer of educational, but I want to be the devil's advocate to you, Hannes. So, because you mentioned the self-governance principle, right? Which kind of also assumes a certain level of literacy, right? And skills, education. But of course, we've seen in the past that education comes sometimes slower than technology. So I guess my question is, how quick and how do they correlate these two parameters in your project? On one hand, people need to be self-governed. On the other hand, they need to be literate and have the skills, right? It's like having a vote. We had the vote before people could read and write, and we saw certain effects of it. You see my question?
Yeah, but I think we're here in Switzerland, right? So we have a fairly educated population, and then I think as it plays out in the physical world, there's a fraction of those who are actually affected by some sort of decision in political theory, at least, they will go and vote, right? So and how do you make it very easy for people to vote on certain changes in a certain community, right? That's also based on identifying the individual. That's very, very important. How can that be done on a news platform so that you don't have double voting and so on and so on? And so we are planning to work with actual identities. So one of the conversations we're having is to work with existing entities such as the Swiss Postal Services or the Swiss public broadcasters who have these contacts, to hand them over, so to say, access tokens to our platform, so that verified people come to use our service. That's one thing. The complexity, I'm more optimistic about it. I do believe in people making good and bad decisions, but we are seeing a country that is basically self-governed and it's doing okay, and we're actually seeing a ton of systems that are self-governed that are doing okay, not perfect, but okay.
Thank you.
Yes,
Jessica, please, of course.
So I love this initiative from Hannes, and I think we need more people around these projects, new projects. And I just think that if you want to take advantage of Switzerland configuration and politics, I think you can reinforce giving the value to the local realities of every canton, of every city, communities, and so. And this is from a bottom-up approach, would actually reinforce the communities and then the federation of these communities.
Thank you. So another recurring theme today was also the legal aspects. So to go beyond tech, non-tech, but the legal part, right? And so as you and me probably both know, there is no such thing as a real media law in Switzerland, right? There is a transversal law, there is multiple laws that together make kind of a legal law system, but it's not a country like Germany, Italy, where there is a Medienrecht, Loi du Média, which leads us to the codex. There is a codex, but it's not stringent as a law, And you mentioned the codex as an entry part into your portal. So my question then is, but is this enough again? Because Switzerland, yes, people are very educated, but there is no such stringent media law. And we have seen the last years, another topic that came up before, there has been tunes to the freedom of media, right? Thinking of the Swiss Secrets and thinking of PMT maybe. So, how do you see the legal base also in this country to promote such a thing?
So what I see as a journalist directly playing out is the shortcomings of the current legal base, right? So I'm seeing especially le Conseil Presse,
Presserat,
genau, der Presserat, how it's actually not able to deal with the increasing volume of complaints, right? So I do think our system is sort of like an initial approach to digitalize something that is already existing in the physical in many ways, right? So it would make it potentially easier to deal with these existing shortcomings. And then secondly, I think politicians in Switzerland are realizing the ways to exploit these vulnerabilities and also to fix these vulnerabilities. So there's political potential for both sides, right? It becoming worse and it becoming better. And I don't know how this will play out, honestly. But
exactly.
I'm quite happy that there's kind of an open ear for this. So the Swiss administration, which is run by Walter Thurnherr as our chancellor, he has put me on one of his advisory boards for digital, discussions, and there he's actually listening to ideas about further developing the Swiss media landscape, and with probably government support in a structural way.
Thank you. Jessica, so I mean, we're touching here laws, which is more social human sciences. You're a sociologist. It's also, as you said, about behaviors. What brought a sociologist into such a techie field? Can you hear me?
Yes, so it was my research on dating apps. Mainly, this was my first entry to the topic of personal data and personal data protection. And actually one of my findings was that actually there was this disconnection between the developers' practices, the economic practices of the company, and the users and their realities. So I wanted to establish a connection between these two realities, the social reality of consumers of platforms, which are, I have to say, not very well educated on personal data management because it's so opaque. So I wanted to bring together these two realities, the economic practices, the marketing practices, development practices, with the uses of the platforms to better manage now, together with the community, their practices around data.
Thank you. Again, if there are questions from the audience, don't hesitate to raise your hand already now or later, but please prepare a few questions. Would be nice. Okay, I'll move on. So you touched also on the situation. So politics, you mentioned it as well. Medienpaket, no Bilag. So you're launching something that is still a medium at the end, and it's about news. And we are in a country where the news are less sustained than we expected, and there is a no Bilag 2 at the horizon. How would you, long term, how do you see, I mean, the business model question has been asked, but how do you see in the long term your project and other projects in Switzerland to contribute to democracy while the country itself is saying we don't help the media?
I don't think the country is saying we don't help the media, but it was a very mixed package of helping paper business, and I think and a little bit of digital here as a 10% of the overall package or so. And so probably it was just not a convincing offer for people to see, oh, this is actually supporting media, because if you look at subscription numbers in Swiss media, partly we are past the low point, right? So there is actually demand and need, and the same for trust in media. We are actually past the low point of trust in media. So there's a certain reconnaissance of the value of press, and I just think that our project is basically a response to the media package's shortcomings, right? They failed in creating an actual way forward that the population would see as a sustainable solution for accessing and getting news. How will that work in a paywalled, future where people actually want to access different sources because they have a little less trust than they used to, and they're used to accessing more things, and so. You need to have an easy way to help people with that, and that's if we will not be able to do this, there's others. So if you're looking, there's such an enormous wave right now of new media apps being created, and a ton of people experimenting with self-governance. So something will come out of this, and somebody needs to start it.
And can I add?
Sure, yeah.
Related to this, when hearing Johannes, I was a bit worried about how the Swiss television and the radio television, it's kind of adopting the same techniques as other tech giants, right? To personalize content, to make translations of all the different languages in Switzerland. And so they know very well already how audience are measured and how to increase. Although they are facing problems like young people are not going to watch TV. Everything is happening in social media. All the problems you have reflected on. And when I hear you, is like you're kind of adopting this top-down perspective from the national TV or national media configuration, right? But actually, you're doing something else, and something I think more powerful is that you're organizing the publishers. You're putting together these experts to organize themselves like a data collective, as in our terms, right? And so you are adding a new value, but seems like again the economic model or the politics is going to take down your initiative. I don't know what do you think about it?
Hannes?
So the publishers, if they themselves would create such a system, it would be against existing. It would be against monopoly law. It would become a cartel. So they can't create such a platform, right? And so we're not organizing them. We're not a helpful tool for organizing a cartel. What we are actually doing is we are trying to create as you framed it, shared value between needs of publishers who want to, sustain their business and journalists who want to publish their material, and the people who want to get clean information as easy and cheap probably as possible, right? And so we're actually working on finding a digital intermediary model where people have more of a say than they have today. So, and lastly, if you read about personalization happening in the public broadcasters, you might not have read about 20 minutes and how the private publishers have extended their coverage in several languages, right? So they actually, within Switzerland, there's now Portuguese and I think Albanian, at least minimum threshold quality news, right? Being published by a private entity.
We had a talk on this today.
So I don't know if Jessica has followed this talk. So actually you might hear about a little bit of personalization, but then again, if you look at the Play shop, right, that the Swiss Public Broadcaster has set up, there's within the recommender system they have set up, there's a need to transport film made in Ticino to the German-speaking part, for example. So it's creating a balance between some sort of personalization and some sort of like intercultural discourse within Switzerland. And I'm not that pessimistic, actually. I think there's tendencies both in public and private media creating a shared space.
So this is, So this is exactly the point of where Paul Olivier and my work is complementary. When he tells me we have tools and new infrastructure to empower society, I tell him, no, we also need social cohesion. And when I talk about organization of a community of experts, this is social cohesion. And this is what we need to guarantee, and that service tech giants are not guaranteeing now. And you're doing it, Hannes, I think, around quality, as you say, quality of journalism.
If I may jump in on reflecting back on our shared experience, Hannes, from 2016, 2017. So the situation was December 2016, Hannes publishes an article in German, has huge reach just before the elections in Germany, millions of views, attention on the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And I'm a newbie at this, and I'm like waiting for a translation into English, a translation into French, something that's obviously relevant across the world. Like, really, it makes no sense that this would come out from a newspaper in Zurich, right? Objectively, that made no sense. But it took forever. It took forever at this happening. It took months and months and months. And in terms of social cohesion at European level, that just makes no sense at all. So there's still something there that I don't understand about the news incentives, the financial incentives behind translation of content.
20 minutes would have translated it automatically.
Right, but even then, I mean, you look at it was months of work of Hannes, and a translation is not, comparatively, it was so much cheaper than the initial work you put into it. I don't know if there is a question, except...
There's so much potential in news still, right? So I just published a story on Sci-Hub, which is a way to access scientific papers, and that's to get that story translated is a lot of personal work, right? So I had to find out within my company, for example, who's responsible for translating it into the French, right? At the very least. And then so it's all but there are a ton of agreements between publishers, for example, but they are just not being enforced. So my outlet is basically in an alliance with Republika and SZ Magazine, but they just don't constantly check the inbox of incoming proposals, right? So this is a separate question, but I think machine translation might help, but it might also kill my business model of getting license fees through reselling stories, right? So there's a trade-off, right? And the same might be true for setting up a Swiss information system, news information system. That might be an interesting tool to develop. And so what we are looking at is, if we're creating this really simple platform, how can we create interfaces for people who have good ideas on how they could add value to the platform, probably as a private business. So for example, if you want to host a discussion and the platform doesn't offer that, it would be easy to develop a plugin and offer, like, a voice discussion room or so for major topics like war on Ukraine, hosted by a person or so. So an ecology of tools. But for that, you really have to have a platform, and we're so far from that yet.
Thank you. I really like your optimism, and I hope you're right that people want more and good news. Audience, please. Yes, I see a question there in the back. Mike is coming.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your speeches and interventions. It's more of a reaction than a question, actually, but it's a reaction on Hannes' talk. When you talked about the 15th century and printing and the religious problems that occurred at these times, I find your parallel very striking, and I'm asking myself if we can make this parallel with today's what's happening with information technologies and the spread of new kind of information spreading from different sources, as opposed to like a Roman Catholic Church that says, okay, the truth is this. Shouldn't we be more concerned by protecting the value of each new representation of truth that emerges, than by like trying to create a new form of truth that would be universal? When I was listening to the speeches, sometimes it struck me that we are looking to rebuild a kind of universal version of truth, when we should maybe be more inclusive and hear and protect every new version of truth that exists. Because each one of us in this room, no one can say in which camp we would have been in 1530 when the religious wars were killing people in Europe. We couldn't say if we were on the Roman Catholic Church side or the Protestant side, and you know what I mean? So maybe we should be very careful with saying that someone is a complotist, someone tries to spread fake news. Maybe we should be very careful when we say, okay, this is the truth, this is an official version of the truth.
That's why, for example, there was this, so if we're talking about delivering quality journalism, I mentioned all these fact-checking approaches, right? So, and when I first started to talk about this idea of setting up a platform, everybody was like, oh, great, then you have fact checkers, right? And everything that I get is like fact check. And we decided, I said I'm an economist, and I actually worked a lot on voluntary certification. And so the idea is rather to work with certain procedural standards, such as the press codex, that verify that the report has been produced, the story that you read has been produced according to certain quality mechanisms, rather than whether it is factually true or not, right? Because I understand, for example, when Paul Olivier and me, we did that report on Cambridge Analytica, which really was the first big story about that company. You know, we didn't know many things that came out later, right? So journalism is an incremental process of truth gathering, right? So all of what I publish today about something is either partially untrue because I don't know and I'm not able to access. It's just a search for truth, right? So you're very right in saying that a system that should be prepared not to be about the truth, just like Donald Trump, right? We don't go that way. We rather go a procedural way. So it's basically, sometimes I compare it to the emergence of supermarkets. Supermarkets made it really easy for people to access food that was produced according to certain standards set by the supermarket. So transaction costs for finding quality food produce were reduced, and there was a threshold. You could sue Migros if they wouldn't, if they would give you some toxic milk or something. And that sort of responsibility mechanism is often overlooked. And I think that doesn't really exist in the news market as it is today. It's just very thin, especially in Switzerland, with no laws and a very weak Presserat, Conseil Presse. So, yeah.
That would actually have been a perfect closing statement. Journalism slowly accumulating, a bit like the scientific process. We are in a
supermarket argument.
Then came the supermarket. That's why we're still open for another. Or you have a comment?
Yeah, the scientific. So I think
we're getting slowly to the end.
This is my parallel with the from the history to now, is that we need to do science on the digital world. We need to have the scientific process applied to the digital world, and this is a machine learning conference, and maybe machine learning specialists have a bit forgotten this at some point. It was more like, let's deploy the system, works in production, makes money. It's a black box. That's okay. I can just change it later. And then we saw that that accelerated news circulation and had side effects that we're only now starting to grapple with and to manage. So being very deliberate in how we understand things, developing a scientific process is important. So another Hannes mentioned Bellingcat, 20 people being extremely systematic in building understanding of something that happens far away, but being underfunded. Well, maybe another approach is to train Bellingcats all over the place. Train everyone to be a bit more fact checker themselves, rather than putting at the top validated fact checkers, right? So instead of having the news delivering trusted knowledge, training people to patch knowledge that comes from different communities together into a trusted or more trustworthy value system or belief systems or reasoning patterns.
Another beautiful closing. So doing journalism like science, tackling the digital world like science, they have not been paid to say this, even if we're at a science and tech school. Jessica, what do you think? Do you have also such a closing statement?
Yeah, totally. I agree with this comment of Hannes that we might not be able to say this is true or this is false, but I think what we need to do is to build expert systems that are now in Hannes' head and in any publisher or journalist. So anybody can become an expert, and we put this expertise in a procedural way so it can be embedded into an algorithm, into recommendation systems, so we improve the technologies that are helping and shaping today our society.
Thanks a lot. We're coming already to the end. If there are no urgent questions, which I don't see, then I would really like to thank you and tell you honestly, I was the least prepared for this session. I was a bit, how will it be? And I enjoyed it a lot. I'm not saying it to congratulate you, but really thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks, Hannes. Thanks, Jessica, for having been with us. And we're coming to the end of the conference as well. So we've had a long day. I hope it was exciting as we promised. I hope we didn't overpromise. There's a bit less people than before. It's, I guess, normal, nearly 5 o'clock in the evening. I learned a lot. I will probably write to some of you in some days or weeks when I have an idea or want to know something. And I think it's a conference, again, physical, and we should connect. And I see already links happening. So yeah, with this, thanks you. Thanks Munir from the Initiative for Media Innovation. Thanks the C4DT. And thanks, of course, AMLD and EPFL. And I hope we'll see each other again here with even a step closer to a bit more knowledge again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good conference. Bye.